Welcome to the most brutal time in history. There is no remorse, no compassion. Caesar has been murdered. Ancient Rome is in chaos. And a gladiator's greatest fight will be for the ultimate truth.
Let's go!
Die! Shadow of Rome, exclusively for PlayStation 2. Rated M for mature, only from Capcom.
Shadow of Rome is a PlayStation 2 exclusive, released decades ago back in 2005. And yet, still to this day, the best Gladiator game ever made. And what games like Rise, Son of Rome should have been like. It truly goes to show how far ahead of its time Shadow of Rome really was. It still is. Don't believe me? See for yourself. The gameplay on screen speaks for itself. And just coming from the opening of the game. So you can imagine what the later arena battles are like. Needless to say, the moment I picked up the severed arm I cut off a gladiator for the first time, started using it as a weapon, I knew this game was something special. To the point, it's about time this game got the proper recognition it deserves, as the masterpiece of gladiatorial games it is, and how it came to be. You play as Agrippa, a former centurion soldier turned gladiator, after his father is accused of the crime of murdering Caesar, and mother is killed in the crossfire, whose gameplay will be focusing on for the most part, since that's what steals the show, as it should. Now, part of what makes Shadow of Rome stand out is its salvos, in which there are 192 of. It really goes to show how much thought the developers put into the game. What you could think of as its own style system. But unlike games like Devil May Cry, where you just play up style for the sake of it, Shadow of Rome actually has an audience. But what matters most here is the mechanics and the rewards it reaps, that on the surface may seem simplistic, but has undeniable depth, to the point I'm still learning new things about the game and how to win the crowd over. Another aspect that makes the game stand out is the way damage is handled, especially compared to other games from the genre, that even today, too many games still lack, thanks to little to no physical, or at the very least visual impact to your opponents after punishing them. To the point, if it weren't for the health bars displayed, there would be no other way to tell if the punishment fits the crime. But Shadow of Rome is different. Not only can you dismember your opponents, but you can also break and fracture their bones as well, while scaring the piss out of them. So they're not just knife sponges. Given the incredible combat, undeniable impact, I wish was more common in games. Thanks in no small part to the game's strong weapon variety, despite being breakable, to the point you will have to scavenge the battlefield to stay armed. As far as flaws go, it's worth mentioning the campaign does have pacing issues outside of battle. Like the developers weren't confident enough the arena battles would be enough for some reason, even though they steal the show without a shadow of a doubt, yet can unfortunately still see the time spent outside the arena being enough to turn some players off. Which could have been fixed if they just gave the secondary character Octavianness a separate Hitman-esque campaign. It's hard to deny the potential of, knowing how rare games from this genre and setting really are, making a better story, yet fails to compete or complement the meat of the game, gameplay-wise. Far too many action games continue to uphold, with the now cliché, obligatory stealth section, that more often than not, offer nowhere near the depth you would want from a dedicated game from the genre. Making for a jack of all trades, master of none nobody wants. Thankfully, if you stick with it though, you'll find the developers were smart enough to let you go back and play the arena battles anytime through battle selection, which gives the game great replay value, thanks to everything you can unlock. And still worth seeing how the story plays out at least once anyways, since it's fairly well told and directed, with a big budget at the time behind it. It's also worth mentioning the game's over-reliance on its lock-on for my taste. The common trend issue games of this era had, to the point fighting more than one enemy at a time can be much harder than it should be, making crowd control difficult without the right tools, especially on higher difficulties, which isn't ideal if you're trying to avoid taking damage, alongside dealing with the game targeting the wrong enemy by mistake, despite looking straight at them. It doesn't help Agrippa's movement speed is a bit too slow for these situations as well, despite the game having a strictly timed dodge system that earns you salvos, but isn't ideal, and nowhere near as reliable as simply pressing a dedicated roll button in any other game. The AI is also pretty bad, and especially easy to expose in the Octavianus sections of the game, but has its charm oddly enough, especially moments when the AI is clearly trying to pick up a weapon, despite not having the arms to do so. It can still be pretty tough, to the point of frustration, being the thieves they are. There's nothing worse than getting a well-earned reward from the crowd, just for the AI to swoop in to steal it instead. And yet, I wouldn't have it any other way, even on extreme. Now, as far as I can tell, besides the typical you take more damage, enemies take less approach to difficulty, enemies appear to be more aggressive and heavy-set as well on extreme, making fracturing and disarming opponents essential to their survival, along with being more difficult to throw. So good luck getting the king of wrestling salvos, unless you have a turbo controller handy. Also worth mentioning, the higher salvos are required to get better rankings and perks, including cheats, that let me tell you, came in real useful during the final stretch of the game on extreme, after earning the highest ranks possible in the arena battles. So you better believe I earned it. Unfortunately for Capcom, Shadow of Rome bombed, and it bombed hard, despite how much the devs wanted to make a sequel, to the point its production was actually greenlit before release, but could never happen without the game being a commercial success, and which it unfortunately wasn't, not even close. Yet for what it's worth, it has acquired a bit of a cult following over the years, after gamers found out its cancelled sequel turned into Dead Rising, to the point you could recognize animations here and there in the game, among other things, ripped straight out of Shadow of Rome. So it wasn't a complete loss, but still can't help but wonder what could have been, especially on next-gen hardware at the time, without holding back on the arena battles, because they just don't make games like this anymore, and that's a real shame. The game's director, Motohide Eshihiro, had this to say about the game in 2013. When asked what titles in particular he wishes to work on in the near future, quote, "Personally speaking, I've always had a place in my heart for Shadow of Rome, so I'd like to make a sequel for it. At the time, there were many radical descriptions of the game. It was full of pros and cons, but I think if we could make some adjustments and make it into something that adults could enjoy, it would be nice. Of late, I could say that I've become an old man, so I've been interested in entertainment for grown-ups." How can what you can argue is the best Dead Rising game be a wasted opportunity? Well, it's simple, at least not in the ways you would expect, thanks to one forgotten aspect of the game, practically abandoned after just the opening of the game: Terra's reality. A solid premise, at least in theory anyways. I can't help but wonder really, if the original idea was for it to be more of a spiritual successor to the arena battles in Shadow of Rome, instead of just the shallow, now dead online-only afterthought it comes off as in the final game, before the former Canadian baseball developers, Blue Castle Games, or should I say what would become the late Capcom Vancouver, took over the project. reason the original developers, considering how much they borrowed from Shadow of Rome, at least in theory, may have intended to bring more aspects of Rome back in Dead Rising 2, hence Terra's reality, which leads to the question, why Dead Rising 2 wasn't developed by the original developers. KG and Ifune, that's why. The producer pushed the idea of Western outsourcing more than anyone, which in retrospect, outside of the success of Dead Rising 2, was a disaster. And why the developers of 2 had to build a new engine from scratch that, despite their best efforts, doesn't hold a candle to the original.
But I can say this of the games downstairs.
You're Jack, a dangerous man caught in Death Watch, a lethal game of survival. The organizers, they're the ones running the show, and they want you dead. To stay alive and win the game, you have to saw, punch, and tear your way out of this godforsaken place. It's a mad world. Wanna play? Rated M for mature.
Easily the most distinct game in Platinum's catalog. That's still a one-of-a-kind game from the beat-em-up genre to this day. And by far my favorite Platinum game. That the spiritual successor, Anarchy Reigns, failed to live up to because of one major reason: the world itself. Make no mistake, what makes Mad World is the level design, through and through. Because without it, the game is lost, no matter how stylish the visuals on display are. Which makes all the more sense, knowing the game was directed by a notable level designer of one of the most popular games ever made, Resident Evil 4, by Shigenori Nishikawa, who unfortunately, much like Shadow of Rome's director, didn't get to direct very many games afterwards, with the last one being the Executioner DLC for Evil Within, which is by far the most interesting DLC for that game. Now, as far as similarities to Shadow of Rome go, just look at it. Even if the similarities are small in the grand scheme of things, they add up enough to the point more than makes a worthy double feature of games to play through. Sure, it has motion controls and offers nowhere near the depth of Shadow of Rome, but don't let that stop you from giving it the shot it deserves. And hard to deny how mad the world of ancient Rome used to be, and still is, in Death Watch. Back when Japanese developers unapologetically tried to make games for the West, despite the lack of initial success.